Time to check in with our CJAD legal analyst. That, of course, is Chris Dimakos. And Chris, got to say, I don't think we'd be talking about ChatGPT and AI when it comes to legal issues, but boy, they seem to become more and more common. And the one specifically today that I want to bring up happened in Vancouver, where a lawyer there has now been reprimanded for citing fake cases invented by ChatGPT. And I should point out the lawyer in question here said it wasn't his intention to deceive the court. He went to ChatGPT, and that's what they gave him. So what do you make of this?
Right. So just to give the listener some context, whenever you were preparing for a case, obviously there's arguments on both sides. What you really want to do is have some case law to basically support what you're saying. And judges are influenced and sometimes bound by precedent. So it's important that you have some case law that says, hey, this happened already, and this is how the court ruled in the past. And lawyers now are starting to use ChatGPT like a quick fix kind of to generate the cases that they want instead of doing it the old-fashioned way. And we're seeing a lot of problems with that. In fact, in many states now in the U.S., they're actually making you disclose that if you use ChatGPT or any artificial intelligence when you're providing your case law to support your arguments, you have to let us know in advance. So basically saying, take these with a grain of salt because I use artificial intelligence. So did this lawyer do that? Did he use ChatGPT and blame it on them when he was trying to fabricate it? I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, there's no question that artificial intelligence is something that moves really quickly, and it's facilitating a lot of the people's lives. And at one point or another, all of the different bars of all the different states are looking at how to protect their profession because there's no question that more and more of the legal, the job and the tasks of a lawyer are being, taken over by this artificial intelligence. We've even seen ChatGPT. They recently wrote a bar exam and it aced it. So it's no question it's troubling. And at the same time, in terms of the errors it can produce, it's something that the legal profession, who's usually very slow to react to anything, is having their hands full here and trying to deal with this and how lawyers can use it.
You know, what you just said really struck me. It's the idea that now, since this is here, and yes, and you're right, the legal profession is reacting fairly quickly, given that we've been talking about AI not for years, but probably just for months. But the idea now, did you suggest that if I'm a lawyer and I use ChatGPT, I use AI to dig up some cases in a particular issue that I'm dealing with, I have to advise the court that I've used ChatGPT or AI?
Right. More and more
Wow.
jurisdictions are saying if you're going to use AI, it's basically like, if you have a chartered accountant that signs off on financials, they want lawyers to sign off on it. They don't want a lawyer to be able to say, hey, don't look at me, I just use ChatGPT. They want lawyers to say, hey, if you're going to use this kind of technology, let us know in advance. So when I look at your cases, I'll know that you use that, and I'll look at them maybe in a different light than someone who went through this process the old-fashioned way. But listen, Aaron, at the end of the day, if you look at 2024, we have, especially in the tech industry, they've laid off 10% of their workforce and are investing all of their money in AI and AI chips. There's no question that what we see today is not going to be the same 10 years from now. So I would suggest that, this is maybe the tip of the iceberg in what we're going to see. It's going to become more and more capable. We've seen artificial intelligence write, lawsuits from start to finish, very well done, by the way, in a matter of seconds, where otherwise we would pay a lawyer to sit there, for hours and produce a factum or produce, legal writings with documentation and support. It does it in seconds. Now, is it perfect? No, but there's no question it's going to keep improving and keep changing. So it's something that not just the legal profession, but many professions have to look at how we're going to control this, because if we don't have parameters on this, it's going to change the way people work. It's going to put things like law school into question because of how much this software can do on its own. So there's no question we're in a state of change, and I'm anxious to see how these different bar entities are going to try and safeguard the one of the most oldest professions in our society.
I can't help but think, though, so this is lawyers, people, who do this for a living. I'm thinking, what if just, the average Joe is going to court, decides to use ChatGPT to come up with some information on a particular case that he or she is dealing with? At that point, I guess, you don't have to reveal your source. You say, look what I found. That I just wonder if the average Joe going ahead and doing this has any advantage or disadvantage now.
Well, They have done it, and the advantage is that you get all of that expertise in seconds. Sometimes it's for free.
Right.
The problem is though that there's some things that the ChatGPT or any artificial intelligence will get wrong, and if you don't have the knowledge or the background to be able to see that, well, then you can walk into a case, by yourself and not know that you're walking into a situation where you're going to be unsuccessful or there's going to be problems. So, I've tried it a couple of times just to see what the results are, and for the most part, it's good. But when you start getting technical, like when you have to get creative about your case, because not every case is black and white. Sometimes the lawyers that have the most creative strategies are the ones that are going to win. That's what the AI has problems with. Using the human creative aspect to creating a case that strategically is better. That's where it's not there yet. So to answer your question, people do it all the time. They use it all the time without any legal background. But if you're not aware of where the mistakes would lie, well, you might be setting yourself up for failure in those types of cases.
Have you actually heard? I remember we had a story like this a while ago out of the U.S. where a lawyer actually thought, and he did this knowing that the information he had when he brought it to court was in fact fake. It was, ChatGPT just created a couple of cases. And in the case of this Vancouver lawyer, you face disbarment if you do this, do you not?
You do, and the reason why is even if you use ChatGPT, you're supposed to look over the case yourself before you submit it to a judge. So if I use ChatGPT to try and support what I'm telling the judge, hey, in these cases, the court ruled in my client's favor with the same circumstances, you still have to look them over. So what the judge was really upset with is that when the lawyer said, well, no, it was ChatGPT that did that, it wasn't me, so blame ChatGPT. Right. Well, the judge is saying, well, yeah, but you still had to look at the cases. I mean, before you put them down on paper and you submitted them to the court, you had to look them over and figure out whether these things were actually true cases and whether they said exactly what ChatGPT is saying. So the lawyers are definitely facing liability and even disbarment, especially if you do so recklessly. Like in this case here, I mean, to submit to the court and say, hey, don't look at me. I just punched it into ChatGPT and then I included it into my pleadings. You need to do a little more than that, especially if you're an officer of the court and you're going to be pleading in front of a judge.
I'm just thinking it'd be a great way to get out of let's say a parking ticket, for example, to go to ChatGPT and say, I need an excuse to get out of a parking ticket, have it write the excuse, which I'm sure is probably going to come up from someone having done this obviously in the past and possibly won. I'm going to give that a try and see how that works.
Yeah, and I knew you were going to go there. Leave it up to you to figure out the solution. But I'll tell you, this is where ChatGPT falls against someone like you, who's able to use that creativity to say, hey, what if I do this and use ChatGPT? Because in these computer technology, they don't have that. It's always, you have to do so within the rules of the scripture that they create when they make these programs. So that walking that fine line, that gray area, is something that artificial intelligence hasn't been able to do yet, which you do very, very well.
I'm just looking. As I were talking here, I actually asked it that question on Copilot, which is Microsoft's AI, right? And
right.
It gave me so far 8 excuses for why I should fight this parking ticket, including your car broke down, I have a parking permit, the ticket machine malfunctioned, unclear road signs and markings, temporary hardship, and medical emergency, and I'm not done. So there you go.
Well,
gotta love that. Chris Dimakos, our CJAD legal contributor. Chris, thanks so much.
Thanks, Aaron.